A quirky college professor vanishes without a trace.
You would have spotted him a mile away. He would have been wearing a Hawaiian shirt, flip-flops.
He's not the type of person that would just go drive away someplace. So right away, I was in a panic.
His body later discovered at the bottom of a cliff. Police suspect foul play.
There was a flock of vultures literally circling in the air.
He'd been there for several days.
It was our pathologist's conclusion that he had actually survived the fall.
We need to determine whether it was a homicide, a suicide, or an accident.
The investigation leads to one of the professor's most trusted friends and a terrifying story of manipulation, betrayal, and greed.
A witness informed us that he did see a blonde female and a male at the scene.
What they were really planning on doing was luring him down to the beach, get him out into the water, and drown him.
When schemes falter, they stop at nothing to get rid of him.
To get in there, take advantage, and gain his trust. That was part of the plan from the very beginning.
What was the plan? To take him up in the quarry and push him up.
Nestled in the lush Nittany Valley of central Pennsylvania is the bustling town of State College.
We're a university town, but the minute you step out of the town, we're a rural county with residents who go back generations.
Over 8,000 of Penn State University's academic staff also live and work in the area. But on August 15, 2016, one of them goes missing.
State College Police Department received a call for a missing persons, a gentleman that lived in Lamont.
The callers say they're friends of Dr. Ronald Bettig, a 55-year-old professor.
They reported that Ronald Bettig had been missing for the entire weekend. They were calling from their house on a Monday. Ronald Bettig and the callers would speak on a regular basis and had regular communication with him.
They tell police that Ron had gone to the beach the previous week with his live-in girlfriend, Danelle Geier, and her uncle, George Ishler.
They knew he was supposed to come back on Friday, the 12th. Whenever several days went by and they had not heard from him, it caused them concern. Our patrol officers responded to the Bettig residence to see, if they could locate him or learn where he may be. When they arrived, Danelle Geier and George Ishler were at the residence. Danelle Geier described herself as Ronald Bettig's girlfriend. George Ishler described himself as Danelle Geier's uncle and a friend of Ronald Bettig.
George and Danelle confirm they were the ones who went with Ron to Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, a 5-hour drive from State College. They stayed at a hotel for a few days before returning with the professor on August 12th.
Danelle Geier indicated they had last seen Ronald Bettig on Friday, late Friday night into Saturday morning after they had returned from going to the beach.
Danelle tells police they went to bed after the long drive and George returned to his home. But when Danelle woke up, Ron was gone.
They were concerned about him, and they did find it also unusual that he had not shown up over the weekend. And they also knew his vehicle was not at the residence. They had serious concern. They indicated he was depressed over the loss of his wife from several years prior. He was having some mental health issues. They thought that something bad had happened to Ronald Bettig. The main issue was, where was Ronald Bettig and where was his vehicle?
Ronald Bettig was born in St. Joseph, Michigan in 1961 and grew up alongside a younger brother and sister.
He liked very simple things. wanting to be outside and being a part of nature, and was very strong inside of him.
His interest in academia was instilled by his mother, who held 2 doctorates in psychology and education.
Our parents were both immigrants. Honestly, what they ended up accomplishing was pretty remarkable. And I think that's where all 3 of the children really had a drive to succeed and to work hard.
Ron earned a PhD in communications, and in 1988, he was hired as a professor by Penn State University.
He taught in the media studies department, and he specifically taught the political economy of communications. He authored 2 books related to that.
Ron's lectures made him a popular, if eccentric, figure around campus.
He didn't like a lot of the technology that was out there. He really was more wanting to interact with them and wanted to have these deeper conversations.
You would have spotted him a mile away. He probably would have been wearing a Hawaiian shirt, flip-flops, and a pair of shorts. Longish hair, looks like somebody who grew up in the 60s.
He was a friendly individual. He was the kind of guy who would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it.
Over the course of his 30 years teaching, Ron was married twice. He had a son and daughter with his first wife.
He met his first wife once he went away to college. They were not getting along as well, and decided to divorce and went their separate ways.
He then met the woman who would become his second wife, Jhene.
He became involved with a colleague that was also at Penn State teaching there. I knew that he was really happy with the way that things were going with him and Jhene together. Their interactions were very loving. With his second marriage, I think there was a lot of parts of him that really started coming alive.
Though the couple amicably divorced in the late 90s, they remained very close. But in 2011, tragedy struck when Jhene took suddenly ill.
She was very sick, and he took her to the hospital, and later that night, or the next morning, she passed away. And they were together probably for 10 years. He would tell me all the time how much he missed her. He was losing weight, and he wasn't going out. And that's also the point where he started to have some memory issues.
4 years after Jeannie's death, the professor took a sabbatical from work.
By the time you get to 2014 and 2015, he's not doing very well. He's not able to teach.
While on sabbatical, Ron was befriended by a shop worker named George Ishler.
George was working at this tobacco shop on College Avenue in State College. Ron would stop in there frequently, and they struck up a friendship based on their mutual interest in marijuana.
As their friendship deepened, George confided in Ron about the struggles his niece Danelle Geier was facing.
She comes up here in February 2016. She doesn't have a place to live. She's got a young baby and no way to support herself.
I remember him calling me and saying, the thought of a person living in their car with a young child is just something that I can't let that go.
In 2016, Ron gave Danelle and her child a room of their own in his house, and having people around gave Ron something in return.
The life force was starting to come back into him. He had purpose. As he started having more and more conversations with Danelle, I think that he also was starting to have feelings for her as well.
After a few months, Ron's relationship with Danelle became romantic, despite their 23-year age difference.
He was very attentive to my sister and the baby. He was a very good man. He was always helping my sister get the things she needed.
What Danelle Geier was to Dr. Bettig was that kind of that bright light. He was no longer alone. He was in love.
After 7 months of living together, Ron has now gone missing. Danelle tells police she's been trying to help Ron with his memory loss and keeping track of his medications. Though George lives separately, he came over that morning when he learned of Ron's disappearance. Now she and her uncle are afraid he's wandered off on his own.
They mentioned that he had marijuana plants, that he would hike and take care of the plants. After the patrol officers returned back to the police station, I was immediately assigned as the detective. A lot of times, cell phone information can be a valuable way to quickly identify and locate somebody. In this case, Ronald Bettig did not have a cell phone. It did not use one.
When officers check Ron's bank records, they find cause for concern.
Ron's credit card had been used pretty regularly up until that weekend, and then all activity had just stopped. There had been no purchases on it.
If he was traveling, gas, food, lodging, at some point in time, he would run out of cash.
He's not the type of person that would just go drive away someplace. So for him to be missing from home right away, I was in a panic. I started asking, what's happening? What's going on?
Coming up, 2 days after the professor's disappearance, investigators make a gruesome discovery.
At the top of the quarry, they find a hand rake, a water bottle, and a flashlight.
She says that she's forced to help him stage the scene so it looked like an accidental fall.
After speaking with Dr. Ron Bettig's friends and family, State College police open an official missing persons investigation.
We listed him and his vehicle in a national database. We also did a media release on hopes that if anyone saw the vehicle or had contact with him, it would generate people calling in. Obviously, the longer a missing persons case goes, the more concern we have. So every day that went by without finding him or finding the vehicle, that concern became greater.
Investigators are able to locate surveillance footage from the trip to Rehoboth Beach, confirming Danelle and George's timeline of Ron's disappearance. On day 3 of the search, investigators get their first lead.
On Wednesday the 17th, first thing in the morning, I was advised by our 911 dispatch center that Ronald Bettig's vehicle had been located on a remote country road.
Investigators drive 10 miles outside of town.
The vehicle was parked unoccupied and off to the side of the road, and it appeared to have been sitting there for several days.
Dr. Bettig's vehicle's in a turnout next to a farmer's property, and to the left and up the hill is an abandoned quarry.
Myself and my supervisor respond to the location. We also notify at that point in time the Pennsylvania State Police. The vehicle appeared to be in good condition. It was not broken into. Obviously, the next step was trying to figure out and determine if Ronald Bettig was in the area.
Investigators and state police conduct a search around the edge of the deep quarry.
It's a limestone quarry that's being dug out, and it's an 80-foot drop from where they were to the bottom.
It was just wooded area that ended up right at a cliff's edge, and easily you could have fallen over.
At the top of the quarry, they find a hand rake, a water bottle, a bag of water softener, and a flashlight.
It's unclear if the items belong to Ron, but their attention is drawn to something else.
There was a flock of vultures literally circling in the air, and the trooper said that I'm pretty sure if we look underneath where that flock of vultures are, we're going to find Professor Bettig.
We proceeded to enter the quarry from the bottom. We found a clothed body laying at the rocks.
It was very obvious that this was Dr. Bettig. If you ran his driver's license record, he was literally wearing the same Hawaiian shirt in that picture.
The state police took over the investigation and the crime scene processing. At that point in time, it went from being a missing persons case to a death investigation. So we're now shifting gears and trying to figure out what happened to Ronald Bettig.
We just did a basic cursory exam there. We could see that he had obvious fractures of his extremities. We felt that he came off the top of the quarry. He had been there for several days, so he was decomposing. We was going off the assumption that the individual that we had was the missing person.
The medical examiner conducts the autopsy later that afternoon.
The findings were that Dr. Bettig's, both of his feet were terribly crushed, that his both femurs were symmetrically broken in very remarkably similar ways. He had no head injury, his heart and lungs, and no evidence of any trauma. He had no cracked ribs, so all of his vital organs were functioning.
We felt that, given the fractures where they was located, that he hit feet first. It was approximately 90 feet, and the cause of death was determined to become blunt force trauma.
It was our pathologist's conclusion that he had actually survived the fall for approximately 2 days.
Stranded without medical care, the professor eventually died from the effects of the fall. To find out his approximate time of death, investigators call in a forensic entomologist.
There was maggots crawling all over him, indicating he'd been there for several days. With the weather, the warmer it is, the quicker the insects, the flies will arrive, and then they'll lay their eggs.
The entomologist dated the larvae based on how old the larvae were at the time of the autopsy.
He determined that the body had probably been there approximately 3 to 5 days.
But there's one answer the autopsy can't provide.
At this point in time, we could not determine from what we found at the scene whether it was a homicide, a suicide, or an accident. And that's why we decided that we would need to re-interview everybody and see if their stories matched up with the evidence and what we were finding at the scene. The evidence, the information we had, it did make sense.
After finding Dr. Ron Bettig's body at the bottom of a quarry, investigators are searching for potential witnesses.
One of our officers had conducted a canvass of the area near the quarry and located a gentleman who was mowing grass near the quarry during the time frame that Ron Bettig's car would have been arriving at the scene. That witness informed us that he did see a blonde female with a child and a male driving the blonde vehicle.
Detectives are stunned by the new development, knowing exactly who matches that description.
Now, the police want to go back and talk to Danelle. While they're planning to do this, Detective Chris Weaver from the State College Police Department gets a call from George Ishler.
George Ishler had reached out to me and indicated that he had learned through the media that Ronald Bettig had been found. He seemed upset. He indicated that he started having concerns about Danelle and why she hadn't reported Ronald Bettig missing sooner.
George tells investigators that on the ride home from Rehoboth Beach the previous Friday, tensions were high between Ron and Danelle.
He did mention that on the way back that there was an argument between him and Ronald Bettig over Danelle Geier and the way that Ronald Bettig was treating her. Basically, he's looking back now in hindsight saying that he's now seeing and thinking that something was going on with Danelle.
He also suggested that Danelle had another man over to Ron's house while Ron was missing that weekend, and really seems to start to turn suspicion on Danelle as being responsible for Ron Bettig's death.
The following morning, which would have been now Thursday, the 18th, we went unannounced in the hopes of catching Danelle alone at the home.
She seemed a little nervous. She didn't seem distraught. We interviewed her starting from the beginning.
Danelle tells detectives that before she met Ron Bettig, she hadn't known much kindness in her life.
Danelle had a very tragic childhood and upbringing. She was repeatedly sexually abused and physically abused.
My understanding of her familial atmosphere was negative. I don't think that she was taught morals or value of herself.
She met her first husband, Thomas, in high school.
I always liked her in school. I just never told her. So I didn't know if she felt the same until a friend of ours hooked us both up together. We got married in 2003. The marriage was great up until we had our son. After he was born is when our relationship really started falling apart. We started, going through custody proceedings.
After a bitter separation, Danelle lost custody of her son.
She was traumatized when she lost custody. She didn't have the financial means to challenge the custody issues in court in Florida.
In her trauma, Danelle moved quickly from one relationship to another. She met her next boyfriend, Brandon, with whom she had a second son.
The relationship with Brandon was very chaotic. They were lovey-dovey at first when the baby was first born, but after that, it was nothing but fights.
When the relationship ended in 2016, Danelle was desperate to get back on her feet and returned to Pennsylvania.
She was always constantly living with people. She's never had an apartment of her own. She was bouncing between my house, my mom's house, and her dad's house.
She had 2 children. One of them was still in her custody, a young toddler. She was near homelessness, and that's when Ron took Danelle in.
Danelle told us that Ron took care of her, fed her, and gave her shelter, and was paying for much of the items needed for raising her child.
Danelle tells investigators she's often talked to her family about how much Ron means to her. So when he disappeared, she was frantic.
She basically gave the same version and a very consistent version of what she had told the first time to the patrol officers.
After Danelle commits to her story, detectives reveal Ron's body has been found.
We alluded to Danelle that George was pointing the finger and telling us that he was suspicious of her. And he's also adding that there was an unknown male with Danelle over the weekend. That concerned her, and she became emotional.
Danelle denies the accusations. But her reaction tells investigators there is more to the story.
I asked her, "What concerns you?" She answered with, she was concerned for the safety of herself and her son. I told her that we could ensure her safety, but she needed to tell us what happened.
At that point in time, she immediately made the statement that George had murdered Ronald Bettig and had pushed him off the quarry. When she initially blurted out, it was surprising, but as she began to tell what happened, it was consistent with our suspicions.
Coming up, the investigation becomes a case of he said, she said.
She asked, where is Ron? He said, I killed him. I killed him, and if you say anything to anybody about it, I'm going to kill you too.
And police hear the details of Ron's terrifying final moments.
What were you to do in Rehoboth? Kill the professor.
According to Danelle Geier, her uncle George Ishler is the one who killed Ron Bettig. And now that she's told them, she's afraid she'll be next.
She said she had nothing to do with it. She says that George Ishler has threatened to kill her, that she's afraid. She's afraid for the life of her child.
So at that point in time, she agreed to go with us to the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks.
Danelle tells a story that George Ishler is going down there to get money because he owes the professor money. He was mad at George Ishler because he had discovered the fact that he had been using his credit card for purchases that he wouldn't have authorized.
Though the professor had given Danelle access to his credit card for necessities, she had abused his goodwill by allowing George to use it without Ron's consent. Ron made it clear George would pay the money back.
George had told Danelle that he had loaned some money to someone in Delaware, and if they go there, he could get some of that money back and pay part of the debt that he owed Ron.
According to Danelle, George was unable to collect the money, so on the ride back, he made a peace offering.
George was now telling Ron that he had marijuana plants growing near a quarry, and they could go there and harvest these plants.
Ron agrees to this. They get to the quarry mid-afternoon on the 12th, and when they get there, Danelle stays with the car and the baby.
George and Ron disappeared into the woods heading towards the quarry.
Danelle tells investigators that George returned alone.
Danelle told us that she had asked George where Ron was. George said, "Don't worry, he's tending to the plants. We will come back for him." And they departed the area of the quarry and headed back to Ron's house.
It wasn't until back at the professor's house when she noticed the dirt on George's knees that she started to suspect that maybe George had done something. And that's when she asked George, where is Ron? He said, I killed him. I killed him, and if you say anything to anybody about it, I'm going to kill you too, and I'm going to kill your son. She was terrified.
She says that she's forced to help him get the professor's car out to the crime scene, park it so that George could stage the scene so it looked like an accidental fall when the professor went back out to tend to his supposed marijuana plants.
Danelle says George coerced her into planting water bottles and a flashlight to make it look like Ron went there by himself. Police hypothesize that this is when the witness saw the pair in Ron's vehicle.
It's very possible that when George and Danelle went back to plant the items, that Ron was still alive at the bottom of that quarry.
Investigators can't be sure Danelle is telling the truth, but for now, they have no evidence she was directly involved with Ron's death.
Danelle had no motive whatsoever to take his life. But George and the professor were arguing over money that George owed the professor. George didn't want to pay it back or couldn't pay it back.
She was released that night, knowing that she would likely come back for a follow-up interview.
It's decided at that point in time that we're going to try to reach out to George Ishler. It's now 11:30 at night, but we decided just to see if he'd be willing to come in. Without hesitation, he agreed.
When we started to speak about Ron's death and about the scene to him, we told him that we didn't feel that he was being truthful with us. Then he changes his story and then says, Ron and I were messing around, wrestling around at the top of the quarry, and he fell. And I posed the question, did you hurt the professor? And he said no. From that point on, he became a little more defensive.
I think he was slowly starting to realize that Danelle had told us the majority of what had occurred. We became more confrontational.
I explained to George the first thing he needed to do was to start being honest with us and tell us exactly what happened with the death of Ron Bettig. His next statement was, Danelle talked me into it. Danelle convinced me to kill him.
In the early morning hours of August 18th, 6 days after Ron Bettig fell to his death, his friend George Ishler confesses that his niece Danelle Geier was the driving force behind Ron's murder.
He said it was because Danelle wanted his money because of the will. We did not know what he was referring to when he mentioned the will. He explained to us that he had wrote a will knowing that Ron's mental state seemed to be diminishing, and Ron had signed it.
The will says that Danelle will inherit Ron's house and that George will become the executor of the remainder of his estate.
Danelle Geier thought he had about $1 million in Disney stock, and she believed that she was going to be a recipient.
The Disney stock that they thought was worth $1 million, that was worth about $50,000.
According to George, his and Danielle's plan to kill Ron was accelerated when Ron found out how much they'd spent using his credit cards.
They were racking up debt. The professor had discovered they had used his credit card after opening up a credit card statement and seeing all these charges that he wasn't aware of. So both Danelle and George knew that the gig was about up.
The whole thing was coming to an end, and Danelle was not going to have anywhere to go and be out in the street with her baby.
That was what compelled the trip to Rehoboth Beach.
What were you to do in Rehoboth? Kill the professor.
What they were really planning on doing was luring him down to the beach and drown him and kill him.
George goes as far to tell us that he did attempt it while they were in Rehoboth. He says he put his hands on Ron and dunked him once, but he couldn't do it.
Did you return to Pennsylvania after that? Yes. What was the plan? To take him up in the quarry and push him off.
He told Ron that he had marijuana plants at the top of this quarry.
What happened while you were up there? Professor and I struggled, and then I ended up pushing him up. I looked down afterwards, I thought he was dead.
At that time of this interview, it was about 6:30 in the morning on Friday morning, and George was placed under arrest and subsequently charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, aggravated assault, conspiracy to commit murder, and tampering with evidence.
But before investigators can arrest Danelle, they have to corroborate George's statement. They obtain a search warrant for George's cell phone and find an incriminating message.
we uncovered a text message that Danelle Geier had sent to George Ishler. The text message said, "I'm so ready, I'm pissed off." This text message was determined to be sent while they were in Delaware.
There's concerning texts between Danelle Geier and George Ishler that raise real questions. Not until police read those texts where there's something concrete to suggest that Ms. Geier is deeply involved in a conspiracy to commit murder.
So now on Saturday evening, on August 20th, we make contact with Danelle Geier and have her come back in for a follow-up interview.
After hours of questioning, Danelle finally confesses.
She finally breaks, and she admits her involvement in Ron's death. They thought they could get some money from this, and that they didn't like the way Ron was talking to them. He was being taken advantage of for his money.
She was placed under arrest and charged with first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and third-degree murder.
To prosecutors, the case appears to be open and shut. But before a trial date can be set, Danelle and George both submit motions to suppress their confessions and plead innocent to the charges.
The police had interrogated her for hours. They were all just, very soft, very defeated sounding yes and no answers. And the police took that to be a confession. After Danelle was arrested, the counselors made arrangements to have a psychologist come in and meet with her.
She had a hard life, She said that she had been sexually abused. Ron had taken her in and she was in trouble.
A lot of people were really, really, really concerned that a jury was going to feel sympathy for her and empathy for her. So that was the most important thing in this trial, was that she not get away with this.
In April 2018, more than a year and a half after Ronald Bettig's death, Danelle Geier and her uncle George Ishler stand trial for his murder.
Danelle's case was joined with George Ishler's case. So whenever we went to court, she had to sit at the same table as George. She had to look at George. It was very, very intimidating.
Danelle and George claim their confessions were coerced and are therefore inadmissible. But when the judge rules against them, their attorneys must re-strategize.
We not only had one, but we had two defendants that testified and actually took the stand themselves.
When George takes the stand, the story he tells is different from the one he gave to investigators.
He said that the professor actually committed suicide.
George Ishler testified that when they were at the quarry wall, at the cliff ledge, that the professor, literally almost like a cartoon character, started acting delirious and out of sorts, that he stood there and then he jumped off sideways. It was the craziest damn thing you've ever heard. Danelle Geier's strategy was much clearer. It was to paint George Ishler as a murderer and just an evil, dangerous human that Danelle Geier was very, very afraid of.
Danelle testifies she was unaware her uncle was planning to kill Ron and that he forced her to help cover it up.
Danelle said there had been no agreement, no conspiracy. George acted on his own.
As for the text message allegedly proving Danelle was the mastermind, her attorney argues the prosecution is reading too much into it.
I believe that the statement or her text message was, "I am pissed, I'm so ready." The police read into that she was so ready to kill the professor. That's not what Danelle meant by that at all. Yeah, she was pissed. They had driven all the way from State College to Rehoboth Beach, and they had been in this motel room for several days. She was pissed at George for doing whatever George was off doing. She was ready to come back to State College.
On cross-examination, she admitted that the professor would have never gotten in the car if she had not been there. I asked her at the very end, did I hear you say correctly that if you had not gone to Rehoboth Beach, the Professor Bettig would still be alive? And she said yes.
After a 6-day trial, the jury renders its verdict.
Both defendants were found guilty of first-degree murder, and in Pennsylvania, that's a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of parole.
There was such relief, if you can call it relief, it doesn't bring anybody back, but at least you feel like somebody will pay for what had happened.
I believe that George Ishler got what he deserved in the end. I don't believe that Danelle Geier got what she deserved. Had the jury heard the psychological testimony, I think the outcome would have been different.
Why did Danelle snap? She lost custody of her kid in Florida, and she needed money. She wanted that kid back desperately. She thought Dr. Bettig was $1 million price tag.
I think that was part of the plan from the very beginning, for her to get in there and form a fake relationship and gain his trust, and then they were going to exploit that.
Ron was a very intriguing and complex person. And he had this one side of him that was just brilliant, intelligent, just have this great sorrow of what happened. You always look at things that way in hindsight and just say, if only I had done this, or if only I had done that. But our whole family has tried as best as we can to, put the past in the past and to move forward and to instead celebrate the goodness that Ron brought this world.
Nestled in the lush Nittany Valley of central Pennsylvania is the bustling town of State College, a vibrant university community that stands as a center of education and culture in an otherwise quiet rural landscape. Moat. The town is home to the sprawling campus of Penn State University, where thousands of academic staff, researchers, and students live and work in close proximity. Mort. The atmosphere is generally one of peaceful pursuit of knowledge, but beneath the surface of this tranquil setting, a tragic story of manipulation, betrayal, and greed unfolded in the late summer of the year 2016 Moat High. At the heart of this tragedy was a highly respected, eccentric, and deeply compassionate man named Ronald Valentine Bettig, an associate professor of media studies who had spent nearly 30 years dedicating his life to his students and his academic research. Mott Hai Ba. Ronald was born in St. Joseph, Michigan, in the year 1961, growing up in a household where academic achievement and intellectual curiosity were highly valued. Monitor. His mother, who held 2 doctorates in psychology and education, instilled in him a deep love for learning, a drive that would lead him to earn a Doctor of Philosophy in Communications and eventually secure a prestigious teaching position at Penn State University. In the year 1988, Mott. As a professor, Ronald was a beloved figure on campus, easily recognized from a distance by his unique and relaxed attire, which typically consisted of a Hawaiian shirt, flip-flops, and shorts. Mott. He possessed a kind and friendly nature, always willing to help others, and was known to be the type of individual who would give the shirt off his back to anyone in need. Mott. Professionally, He was highly accomplished, teaching the political economy of communications and authoring 2 influential books in his field, Mott. He was known for his resistance to modern technology, preferring deep, personal, face-to-face interactions with his students rather than relying on digital devices. Mort, despite his academic brilliance, struggled with personal tragedies later in his life. He had been married twice, and although both marriages ended in divorce, he remained incredibly close to his second wife, Jhene Mort. When Jhene suddenly became ill and passed away in the year 2011, Ronald was devastated. The loss plunged him into a profound and lasting depression. He began to lose weight, withdrew from social activities, and over time began to suffer from cognitive decline and memory issues, which eventually forced him to take a sabbatical from his university duties. It was during this period of extreme vulnerability that Ronald met a local shop worker named George Jean Ishler Jr. at a tobacco shop in State College, Montbone. The 2 men struck up a friendship based on shared interests, and as their bond grew, George began to learn about Ronald's personal life, his loneliness, and his financial stability. Sensing an opportunity, George began to introduce his niece, Danelle Geier, a 32-year-old woman who was facing significant personal and financial hardships. Danelle had experienced a highly difficult and traumatic upbringing, and she was struggling to support herself and her young toddler after losing custody of her older child in Florida. She was near homelessness, bouncing between the homes of various relatives, when George suggested to Ronald that she needed help. Ronald, driven by his innate kindness and unable to bear the thought of a young child and a mother living in their car, offered Danelle and her child a room in his home in Lemont, Pennsylvania, in early 2016. For a short time, this arrangement seemed mutually beneficial, as the presence of a family brought life and purpose back to Ronald's quiet house, and he began to feel less alone. Over the next several months, his relationship with Danelle became romantic, despite an age difference of 23 years. However, the domestic peace was short-lived. George and Danelle began to systematically abuse Ronald's financial trust, utilizing his credit cards without authorization, and accumulating significant debt. Recognizing Ronald's declining cognitive state, they even managed to get him to handwrite a will that named Danelle as a major beneficiary of his estate and appointed George as the executor. They mistakenly believed that Ronald possessed immense wealth, specifically rumor of $1 million in Disney stock, though in reality, the stock was worth only around $50,000. When Ronald discovered the unauthorized charges on his credit card statements and confronted them, the 2 realized their parasitic scheme was about to end. Fearing they would be cast out and forced to face financial ruin, George and Danelle formulated a dark conspiracy to end Ronald's life to secure the inheritance. Their first attempt occurred during a trip to Rehoboth Beach in Delaware, where they planned to lure Ronald into the ocean and drown him. However, George was unable to carry out the act, and they returned to Pennsylvania with their plans unresolved. Upon their return, they devised a secondary plan that relied on Ronald's trust. On August 12, 2016, George and Danelle convinced Ronald to travel with them to an abandoned quarry in Potter Township, known as the Black Hawk Quarry, under the false pretense that George had marijuana plants growing near the edge of the cliff that they could harvest together. Danelle remained in the vehicle with her young child, while George and Ronald walked into the wooded area toward the cliff maw. Once they reached the precipice, which featured a sheer drop of approximately 75 to 80 feet, George pushed Ronald off the ledge. Hasautam. Tragically, the autopsy would later reveal that Ronald survived the initial fall, landing feet first on the rocky ground below Mott. Both of his legs, his pelvis, and his jaw were severely fractured, leaving him completely immobilized and unable to seek help. Mott Hickson. Without medical intervention, food, or water, he lay at the bottom of the quarry for approximately 2 days before succumbing to dehydration and the trauma of his injuries. Mott Hickson. Following the act, George returned to the car and informed Danelle that the deed was done. Mott. They returned to Lemont, but they knew they needed to cover their tracks. Mott. Over the weekend, they returned to the quarry to stage the scene, parking Ronald S. vehicle in a nearby turnout to make it appear as though he had driven there himself. Mott Sao. They planted several items at the top of the cliff, including a hand rake, a flashlight, water bottles, and a bag of water softener, intending to convince investigators that Ronald had suffered an accidental fall while tending to his plants alone. Mott Sao. To complete the deception, George and Danelle waited until Monday, August 15, 2016, to contact the State College Police Department and report Ronald as a missing person, claiming they had not seen him since late Friday night and suggesting he was depressed and might have wandered off. Mott Sao. The police immediately initiated a missing persons investigation, but they quickly noticed several anomalies more. Ronald, a man with no cell phone and a very predictable routine, had suddenly vanished without any further activity on his credit cards, which had been used regularly up until that weekend. Mott. On Wednesday, August 17, 2016, a dispatcher notified investigators that Ronald S. vehicle had been located on a remote country road next to the abandoned quarry. Mott Sao. Upon arriving at the scene, officers conducted a search of the quarry edge, discovering the staged items and noticing a flock of vultures circling over the quarry floor. Mott descending to the bottom, they made the grim discovery of Ronald S. body, still dressed in his signature Hawaiian shirt. Mott. The state police took over the scene, transitioning the case from a missing persons inquiry to a suspicious death investigation. Mott. The physical evidence and the forensic findings quickly began to dismantle the carefully constructed lies of the perpetrators. Mort, a local resident who had been mowing grass near the quarry during the time frame of Ronald's disappearance, informed detectives that he had observed a red vehicle carrying a male, a blonde female, and a child at the scene. Mott Tom. This description perfectly matched George, Danelle, and her toddler, directly contradicting their claims that they had not been in the area and had last seen Ronald at his home. Mott Sao. Furthermore, when detectives re-interviewed the suspects, the psychological pressure caused their stories to crumble. Mott. George contacted the police, attempting to cast suspicion on Danelle by claiming she had behaved oddly and had kept another man at the house. Mott. In response, detectives interviewed Danelle alone at her residence, revealing that George was pointing the finger at her. Mott. Terrified, Danelle immediately blamed George, claiming he had murdered Ronald and had threatened to kill her and her child if she spoke to anyone. Mott Sao. As the investigation deepened, George was brought in for questioning late at night. Mott. When confronted with the inconsistencies in his story, George changed his narrative, first claiming that Ronald S. fall was an accident that occurred while they were wrestling at the top of the cliff. Mott Bone. When detectives pressed further, George confessed that Danelle had manipulated him into committing the murder to obtain Ronald S. estate through the handwritten Wilma Bond. To solidify the case, police obtained a search warrant for the suspect's mobile phones, uncovering incriminating text messages sent during their Delaware trip, where Danelle expressed that she was highly angry and ready to move forward, confirming her direct involvement in the conspiracy Moat Bay. Both individuals were arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, aggravated assault, and tampering with evidence bonsau. The trial of George Ishler and Danelle Geier took place in April of the year 2018 in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, Bonmuy. Throughout the proceedings, both defendants attempted to minimize their roles and suppress their previous confessions, claiming they had been coerced by investigators Mort. George took the stand and offered an incredibly far-fetched defense, claiming that Ronald had behaved erratically and had jumped off the cliff of his own accord, a claim that was completely contradicted by the forensic evidence and his own prior statements. Danelle's defense argued that she was a victim of domestic manipulation, acting under duress and fear of George, and was entirely unaware of any plan to harm the Professor Highborn. However, on cross-examination, the prosecution pointed out that Ronald would never have traveled to the quarry or Delaware had it not been for her presence, a fact she ultimately conceded Molt. After a 6-day trial, the jury deliberated for only about 2 hours before finding Beotehat George Ishler and Danelle Geier guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, resulting in mandatory sentences of life in prison without the possibility of parole Mot High. This tragic case offers a profound and sobering opportunity to analyze the motives behind such heinous crimes and understand why vulnerable individuals are so frequently targeted by parasitic opportunists. The primary motive in this crime was pure material greed, exacerbated by absolute financial desperation. Both George and Danelle were individuals who struggled with chronic instability, unemployment, and debt bond. When they encountered Ronald, a gentle academic with a steady income and perceived wealth, they saw a golden opportunity to resolve their financial problems. Their greed was further intensified by their own ignorance, as they falsely assumed Ronald possessed a fortune in corporate stock, based on simple rumors, displaying a complete lack of financial literacy and a willingness to commit the ultimate crime for a perceived payoff that did not exist. Such cases occur with alarming frequency because perpetrators of financial exploitation systematically seek out individuals who suffer from isolation, loneliness, and cognitive decline. Ronald's deep grief following the loss of his wife had severed many of his social connections, leaving him isolated from his colleagues and family. When an individual experiences memory issues and cognitive deterioration, they become incredibly trusting and highly susceptible to charm and manufactured affection. Parasitic individuals exploit this vulnerability by offering companionship and assistance, gradually establishing a dependency that allows them to gain control over the victim's finances, legal documents, and personal life. The transition from financial exploitation to physical violence often occurs when the perpetrators realize their deception has been discovered or that their access to the victim's resources is threatened, driving them to commit desperate acts to avoid exposure or secure a final payout. The successful resolution of this case highlights the critical details and clues that law enforcement officers rely on to track down perpetrators and dismantle complex webs of lies. In this investigation, the police did not rely on a single piece of evidence, but rather constructed a comprehensive mosaic of proof that combined physical, digital, and circumstantial clues. Mort. One of the most important initial clues was the immediate tracking of Ronald S. financial transactions. Mort. By analyzing his credit card usage, investigators quickly established that his normal spending habits had abruptly stopped, while unauthorized charges made by the suspects provided a clear timeline of financial abuse and a strong motive for the crime, Mott-Bone. Additionally, the utilization of community canvases was vital. Mort. By interviewing residents near the quarry, officers located a crucial eyewitness who had seen a vehicle matching the suspect's description at the remote location, immediately shattering their alibi that they had not left Lemont during the weekend of the disappearance. Moat Sao Tom. Forensic science played an equally critical role in proving the homicidal nature of the crime and exposing the physical impossibility of the suspects. Defense theories. Mott. The forensic pathologists. Detailed examination of Ronald S. fractures proved that he had landed feet first, a pattern consistent with being pushed from a height, rather than showing defensive injuries or head trauma that might suggest a different struggle. Mott. Crucially, the pathologist's determination that Ronald had survived the fall for approximately 2 days exposed the absolute cruelty of the perpetrators, who had left him to perish while they went about their lives and staged the scene. Moat High. To establish the exact timeline, investigators utilized forensic entomology, analyzing the development of insect larvae on the remains to pinpoint the time of death with scientific precision, allowing prosecutors to dismantle the defendant's claims regarding when Ronald had supposedly vanished. Mott. Furthermore, the digital footprints left behind by the criminals provided irrefutable evidence of a premeditated conspiracy. Moat Bay. Although the perpetrators believed they had executed a sophisticated cover-up by staging the quarry edge with household items and presenting a united front to the police, their actions lacked true sophistication. Mosau. They failed to realize that their mobile phones recorded their movements and communications. Mo 2. The retrieval of the text messages sent during their trip to Delaware proved that they had discussed their dark plans well in advance, rendering their claims of a sudden accident or an independent act completely unbelievable to the jury. Mott. This demonstrates a common theme in criminal investigations, which is that no matter how carefully a crime is planned, the perpetrators almost always leave behind a trail of digital and behavioral anomalies that experienced investigators can exploit. Mort. Valuable life lessons can be drawn from this tragedy to prevent similar cases and protect vulnerable members of our communities. Nam. First and foremost, it is essential to recognize the dangers of social isolation, especially for those who are elderly, grieving, or experiencing cognitive decline. Bon Nam. Families, neighbors, and colleagues must maintain regular contact with vulnerable individuals, ensuring they have a strong support network that can identify unusual changes in their behavior, living arrangements, or financial situations. Bon. When a vulnerable person suddenly withdraws from their established social circles or begins associating with individuals who appear to exploit their generosity, it should immediately raise concern and prompt a gentle intervention. Mott-Bone. Furthermore, establishing strict financial and legal safeguards is critical to preventing exploitation. Bon. Vulnerable individuals should be encouraged to utilize professional financial advisors, trusted family members, or legal representatives to oversee their estates and monitor credit card accounts. Bon. The creation of legal documents such as wills or powers of attorney should always be conducted in the presence of qualified legal professionals who can assess the individual's mental capacity and ensure they are acting of their own free will, free from undue influence or coercion. Motbon. Educating the public about the warning signs of financial grooming and emotional manipulation is also essential. Empowering communities to recognize when a relationship has transitioned from genuine friendship to a predatory dynamic motbon. For law enforcement agencies, this case provides important insights into how investigative techniques can be optimized to resolve missing persons and suspicious death cases more rapidly. Mott. Time is of the essence in any missing persons investigation, and the rapid deployment of resources is key. Mott. Investigators can expedite the resolution of such cases by immediately integrating financial and digital forensics into the initial steps of the inquiry. Moat. Checking bank records, credit card transactions, and mobile phone location data within the first 24 hours can instantly reveal whether a missing individual has traveled voluntarily or if their resources are being exploited by others. Mort. Additionally, establishing strong protocols for immediate community canvassing and media outreach can generate critical leads before witnesses. Memories fade. Motsau. In this case, the early identification of the witness who was mowing grass proved to be a turning point, demonstrating the value of speaking to everyone in the vicinity of a potential crime scene. Motsau. Law enforcement agencies should also continue to foster close collaboration between local police, state investigators, and forensic specialists, such as pathologists and entomologists, ensuring that scientific evidence is processed and analyzed with maximum efficiency. Mott. By combining advanced technology with traditional, rigorous detective work, police can quickly pierce through the deceptions of criminals, bringing justice to victims and ensuring that those who seek to exploit the kind and vulnerable are held fully accountable under the law. Moat High. Nestled in the lush Nittany Valley of central Pennsylvania is the bustling town of State College, a community where the energetic pulse of a major university town harmoniously meets the serene charm of the surrounding rural countryside. State College is a place deeply defined by its academic institution, Penn State University, where over 8,000 academic staff members live, work, and shape the minds of the next generation. For many, it is an idyllic haven of intellectual pursuit, safety, and community longevity, with generations of families calling the surrounding county their home. Yet, beneath this tranquil surface of scholarly dedication and scenic beauty, a dark and complex story of manipulation, betrayal, and greed unfolded in the late summer of the year 2016. This tragic sequence of events would shock the community, taking the life of a beloved, eccentric, and highly respected educator, while highlighting the terrifying lengths to which individuals will go when driven by financial desperation. The victim of this tragic event was Dr. Ronald Bettig, a 55-year-old professor in the Media Studies Department at Penn State University. Dr. Bettig was the kind of person whom anyone would have spotted from a mile away, a distinctive figure who walked the campus grounds with an easygoing, bohemian charm. He was known for his signature style, almost always wearing a colorful Hawaiian shirt, flip-flops, and a pair of shorts, with his longish hair reflecting a free-spirited sensibility reminiscent of the 1960s. Far from being just an eccentric dresser, Dr. Bettig was a brilliant scholar who taught the political economy of communications and authored 2 respected books on the subject. He was beloved by his students because of his unconventional approach to teaching, preferring genuine face-to-face interactions and deep intellectual conversations over modern technology. He was a friendly, gentle individual who would have given the shirt off his back to anyone in need, demonstrating a profound capacity for empathy and kindness throughout his 30 years of academic service. Despite his professional success, Dr. Bettig's personal life had been marked by significant sorrow. He had been married twice, having a son and a daughter with his first wife, before they amicably divorced. He later met his second wife, Jhene, who was also a colleague at the university, and their relationship brought an immense sense of joy, love, and vitality back into his life. However, in the year 2011, tragedy struck when Jhene fell suddenly ill and passed away. The loss of his beloved wife devastated Dr. Bettig, leading to a period of severe depression, noticeable weight loss, and isolation. As the years progressed, his emotional struggles began to manifest as cognitive decline, including memory issues that made it increasingly difficult for him to perform his teaching duties. By the year 2014 and into 2015, his condition had deteriorated to the point where he was forced to take a sabbatical, leaving him largely isolated in his home, in the quiet village of Lement, just outside of State College. It was during this vulnerable period of isolation and cognitive decline that a parasite found its way into Dr. Bettig's life. While on his sabbatical, the lonely professor struck up a casual friendship with a local tobacco shop worker named George Ishler. The two men bonded over a shared, casual interest in cultivating specific botanical specimens. For the lonely professor, George's friendly demeanor was a welcome distraction from his grief and isolation. As their friendship deepened, George began to confide in Dr. Bettig about the severe hardships faced by his niece, Danelle Geier. In February of the year 2016, Danelle had returned to Pennsylvania from Florida, near homelessness, with no steady income and a very young toddler to care for. Moved by a profound sense of compassion, Dr. Bettig could not bear the thought of a young mother and her child living in a car, and he generously offered them a room in his home, rent-free. For a brief moment, this arrangement seemed to bring a renewed sense of purpose and vitality to Dr. Bettig, as having a young family in his house gave him a reason to engage with the world again. However, this act of pure charity was quickly exploited. Over the course of 7 months, the relationship between Dr. Bettig and Danelle grew romantic, despite a 23-year age difference. While the professor believed he had found a companion who truly cared for him, Danelle and her Uncle George were actually constructing a systematic plan of financial exploitation. Recognizing Dr. Bettig's fading memory and vulnerability, they began to abuse his goodwill. Although the professor had allowed Danelle access to his credit cards for essential household needs, she and George began utilizing the cards for unauthorized personal purchases, running up thousands of dollars in debt. The depths of their manipulation reached a terrifying peak when they convinced the cognitively impaired professor to sign a newly drafted will. This document designated Danelle as the sole beneficiary of his home and named George as the executor of his estate. The driving force behind this predatory behavior was a colossal misunderstanding of Dr. Bettig's actual wealth. Danelle and George had convinced themselves that the professor possessed a fortune of approximately $1 million in Disney stock. In reality, the stock was worth only about $50,000, a supreme irony that highlights the utter foolishness and short-sightedness of the perpetrators. They had constructed an elaborate, lethal plot based on a financial fantasy demonstrating how greed can completely distort a person's grasp on reality. The conspiracy escalated rapidly in August of the year 2016, when Dr. Bettig opened a credit card statement and discovered the massive unauthorized charges run up by Danelle and George. Realizing that their deceptive scheme was about to be fully exposed, the aunt and uncle duo decided that they needed to eliminate the professor to secure their imagined inheritance before he could revoke the will or involve the authorities. They organized a trip to Rehoboth Beach in Delaware under the guise of a relaxing vacation. But their hidden agenda was far more sinister. According to subsequent confessions, the original plan was to lure Dr. Bettig into the ocean and submerge him in the water to end his life. However, when they arrived at the beach, George's nerves faltered, and he was unable to carry out the act. Unwilling to abandon their deadly objective, they returned to Pennsylvania on August 12, 2016, with a backup plan. George convinced Dr. Bettig that he had a patch of high-quality botanical plants growing near an abandoned limestone quarry in central Pennsylvania, suggesting they go harvest them together. The group drove to the remote location, with Danelle and her toddler remaining in the vehicle, while George led the training professor into the woods toward the edge of the quarry. Upon reaching the 90-foot cliff face, George pushed Dr. Bettig off the edge, expecting the fall to end his life instantly. He then returned to the vehicle, leaving the professor behind, and drove back to Lemont with Danelle. In a heartbreaking twist of fate, the medical examiner's subsequent autopsy revealed that Dr. Bettig actually survived the 90-foot fall. He landed feet first, which resulted in severe lower extremity trauma, including crushed feet and symmetrically fractured femurs, but left his vital organs completely intact. Stranded at the bottom of the remote quarry, unable to move or call for help, the gentle professor survived in absolute isolation for approximately 2 days before finally succumbing to the effects of the fall. While he lay suffering, Danelle and George returned to the scene to park his vehicle nearby and plant items, including a hand rake, a water bottle, and a flashlight, at the top of the cliff. They did this to stage the scene, making it appear as though the professor had wandered off on his own to tend to his plants and accidentally fallen. The investigation into Dr. Bettig's disappearance began on Monday, August 15, 2016, when actual long-term friends of the professor contacted the State College Police Department. They reported that they had not heard from him all weekend, which was highly unusual given their regular communication. When patrol officers arrived at Dr. Bettig's home, they found Danelle and George there, who claimed the professor had simply vanished. Over the weekend after they returned from their beach trip, they painted a picture of a depressed, mentally unstable man who had likely wandered off into the woods, hoping to steer the police toward a theory of suicide or a tragic accident. However, the State College Police Department, led by skilled detectives, immediately noticed inconsistencies. The professor did not own a cellular phone, which presented a significant challenge for modern tracking techniques. Nevertheless, investigators quickly obtained his financial records and discovered that all credit card activity had abruptly stopped on the weekend of his disappearance, indicating a sudden and total cessation of his normal routine. The breakthrough in the search occurred on Wednesday, August 17th, when Dr. Bettig's vehicle was discovered parked in a turnout on a remote country road next to a farm near an abandoned limestone quarry. As police officers and Pennsylvania state troopers searched the perimeter of the steep quarry, Their attention was drawn to a flock of vultures circling in the air directly above the cliff. Guided by this grim natural sign, investigators descended to the bottom of the quarry and discovered the body of Dr. Bettig, still wearing his signature Hawaiian shirt. The discovery transformed the missing person case into a death investigation, and the forensic sciences quickly began to unravel the lies of the perpetrators. A forensic entomologist analyzed insect larvae found on the remains, confirming that the body had been at the bottom of the quarry for several days, placing the time of the fall on Friday, August 12th. The most critical piece of evidence that shattered the suspect's alibi came from a meticulous canvass of the neighborhood surrounding the quarry. Detectives located a local resident who had been mowing his grass near the property during the exact time frame of the crime. This witness reported seeing a light-colored vehicle arrive at the scene, containing a male, a blonde female, and a young child. This description perfectly matched Danelle, her toddler, and George, placing them directly at the crime scene at the time of Dr. Bettig's disappearance. Faced with this mounting pressure, the co-conspirators' alliance quickly crumbled, revealing the classic psychological fractures that occur among criminals. George preemptively contacted the police to voice suspicious concerns about Danelle, hoping to deflect attention away from himself. When detectives interviewed Danelle alone, she became emotional and blurted out that George had murdered the professor and threatened to end her life and the life of her child if she spoke out. She claimed she had been forced to help him stage the scene. When detectives confronted George with Danelle's accusations, his defense collapsed. He admitted to pushing the professor off the cliff, but claimed that Danelle was the mastermind who had talked him into it, driven by her desire to inherit the imagined $1 million estate. He also confessed to the attempted drowning in Delaware. To corroborate these conflicting stories, investigators obtained a search warrant for George's cellular phone and recovered an incredibly incriminating text message sent by Danelle during their trip to Delaware, which read, "Mot met, so ready, mot met, pissed off." This digital evidence proved her active, enthusiastic involvement in the conspiracy, dismantling her claims of coercion. In April of the year 2018, both defendants stood trial for the murder of Dr. Ronald Bettig. Despite attempting to suppress their confessions and presenting absurd contradictory defenses on the witness stand, such as George's claim that the professor had deliriously jumped off the cliff sideways, like a cartoon character, the jury was not deceived. After a 6-day trial, both Danelle Geier and George Ishler were found guilty of first-degree murder. In the state of Pennsylvania, this conviction carries a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring that both perpetrators would spend the remainder of their days behind bars. This tragic case offers several profound life lessons on how communities can prevent such exploitation of vulnerable individuals. First, it highlights the importance of maintaining strong social and family connections for older adults, particularly those experiencing grief or cognitive decline. Isolation is the primary tool of predatory individuals, and regular check-ins by family, friends, and neighbors can disrupt these manipulative dynamics before they escalate. Second, financial vigilance is crucial. Families should establish third-party oversight or power of attorney arrangements for aging loved ones to monitor financial statements and protect assets from unauthorized exploitation. For law enforcement, this case demonstrates the invaluable role of integrated forensic sciences and rapid community canvassing. The combination of financial forensics, forensic entomology, and cell phone digital analysis allowed investigators to construct an airtight timeline that exposed the suspect's fabrications. Furthermore, the decision to interview the suspects separately and play their accounts against one another took advantage of their natural distrust, leading to swift confessions. Ultimately, while nothing can bring back the gentle, eccentric scholar who brought so much joy to his students, the relentless pursuit of justice by the State College Police and the Pennsylvania State Police ensured that his killers were held fully accountable, allowing his family and community to remember and celebrate the immense goodness that Dr. Ronald Bettig brought to the world. The human heart possesses an extraordinary capacity for empathy, a quality that can build communities and heal deep wounds. Yet this very vulnerability can also be targeted by those driven by malice, manipulation, and unchecked greed. In the quiet, picturesque landscape of central Pennsylvania, nestled within the lush valleys of the Appalachian Mountains, lies the vibrant community of State College. Home to the sprawling campus of Pennsylvania State University, this town is a unique mixture of academic intellectualism and deeply rooted rural tradition, where thousands of professors, researchers, and students coexist with generations of families who have lived in the area for over a century. It is a place where trust is often taken for granted and neighbors look out for one another. Yet, beneath this tranquil exterior, a tragedy unfolded in the late summer of the year 2016 that would shock the academic community and expose a terrifying tale of betrayal. The victim of this tragedy was Dr. Ronald Bettig, a beloved, eccentric, and brilliant 55-year-old professor of media studies who vanished without a trace, leaving his friends and family in a state of sudden panic. The subsequent investigation would reveal not only a highly coordinated plot to exploit a vulnerable man, but also a profound narrative about the resilience of justice and the meticulous efforts of law enforcement officers who refused to let a crime go unsolved. To understand the tragedy that befell Dr. Bettig, one must first understand the man himself. Born in St. Joseph, Michigan, in the year 1961, Ronald grew up with a deep appreciation for nature, simplicity, and intellectual pursuit. Raised by a mother who held 2 doctorates in psychology and education, Ronald and his siblings were instilled with a powerful drive to succeed and a respect for academic rigor. He went on to earn his Doctor of Philosophy in Communications, and in the year 1988, he was welcomed into the faculty of Pennsylvania State University. Over the course of nearly 30 years, Ronald became a fixture of the Media Studies Department, teaching the political economy of communications and authoring 2 highly regarded books on the subject. To his students and colleagues, he was a memorable figure who could be spotted a mile away. Rejecting the sterile trends of modern technology, Ronald preferred genuine human interaction, often conducting deep, philosophical conversations while wearing his signature Hawaiian shirts, flip-flops, and casual shorts. With his longish hair and friendly demeanor, he resembled someone who had happily retained the peaceful spirit of the 1960s. He was known as the kind of gentle soul who would give you the shirt off his back if you were in need, a trait that spoke to his profound generosity, but also left him susceptible to those who did not share his moral compass. Despite his academic success, Ronald's personal life was marked by both love and profound sorrow. After a divorce from his first wife with whom he shared 2 children, he found deep happiness with a colleague named Jhene. Their relationship was described by those close to them as incredibly loving and vibrant, bringing a newfound sense of joy and vitality to Ronald S. life. Although they eventually divorced amicably in the late 1990s, they remained exceptionally close companions. The turning point in Ronald's emotional well-being occurred in the year 2011, when jhene suddenly fell ill and passed away. The loss shattered Ronald. He struggled to cope with the immense grief, experiencing significant weight loss, withdrawing from social circles, and beginning to suffer from noticeable cognitive and memory issues. By the years 2014 and 2015, his decline was so pronounced that he was forced to take a sabbatical from his teaching duties, leaving him isolated in his home in the small village of Lemont, just outside State College. It was during this period of extreme vulnerability that predatory forces began to circle. While on sabbatical, Ronald sought solace in simple routines, frequently visiting a local tobacco shop in State College. There, he struck up a friendship with a retail worker named George Ishler. The two men bonded over casual conversations and shared interests, and as their familiarity grew, George began to weave a narrative of hardship involving his family. Specifically, George spoke of his niece, Danelle Geier, who had arrived in Pennsylvania in February of the year 2016. Danelle was facing severe difficulties, finding herself near homelessness with a young toddler and no means of financial support. For a man of Ronald's compassionate nature, the thought of a mother and a young child living in a car was intolerable. Driven by a desire to help and perhaps seeking a sense of purpose to fill the void left by his late wife, Ronald opened his home to Danelle and her child, offering them a rent-free room. For a brief period, this arrangement seemed to breathe life back into the aging professor. The quiet house was once again filled, vacep atahat activity, and Ronald felt needed and appreciated. Over the course of several months, his platonic care for Danelle shifted into romantic affection, despite a 23-year age difference. To the outside world, and even to some family members, Danelle appeared to be a source of comfort for Ronald, helping him manage his daily medications and keeping track of his increasingly frequent memory lapses. Beneath this facade of caregiving lay a calculated scheme of financial exploitation. Ronald's generous spirit was systematically turned against him. While Danelle and George gained his trust, they also gained access to his financial resources, using his credit cards to rack up substantial debts that far exceeded any reasonable expenses for necessities. The turning point in this psychological drama came when Ronald discovered the unauthorized charges. Despite his memory issues, the professor was an intelligent man who kept track of his financial accounts. Upon opening a credit card statement and seeing the extensive debt accumulated by George and Danelle, Ronald confronted them, demanding that George pay back the money he had spent. This confrontation sent shockwaves through the perpetrator's plans. Danelle and George realized that their comfortable lifestyle was threatened, and they feared they would soon be cast back into financial instability. Furthermore, their greed had been fueled by a massive misconception. Believing that Ronald possessed a fortune worth $1 million in Disney stock, Danelle had convinced herself that she stood to inherit vast wealth if the professor were out of the picture. To secure this inheritance, they had coerced the mentally declining professor into signing a will that named Danelle as the primary beneficiary of his home and George as the executor of his estate. In reality, the stock they believed to be worth $1 million was valued at only $50,000. A tragic irony that highlights the utter foolishness and desperate short-sightedness of their criminal minds. Fearing exposure and desperate to claim the imagined fortune, George and Danelle formulated a sinister plan to eliminate the professor. Their first attempt occurred during a trip to Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, in August of the year 2016. The 5-hour drive was ostensibly a relaxing vacation, but the true objective was far more dark. The plan was to lure Ronald into the ocean and drown him under the guise of an accidental swimming mishap. George later confessed to investigators that he had gone so far as to submerge Ronald in the water, but he ultimately faltered, unable to complete the act at that moment. The tension during the trip was palpable, evidenced by an incriminating text message sent by Danelle to George, expressing her anger and readiness to move forward with their plans. When the drowning scheme failed, the conspirators returned to Pennsylvania, but their resolve did not waver. On Friday, the 12th of August, they set their secondary plan into motion. George concocted a story about wild marijuana plants growing near an abandoned limestone quarry in a rural area 10 miles outside State College. Knowing Ronald S.'s interest in cultivating such plants, George invited him to hike up to the quarry to harvest them. Upon arriving at the remote location, Danelle remained in the vehicle with her young child, acting as a lookout, while George and Ronald walked into the dense woods toward the edge of the 80-foot cliff. It was there, at the precipice of the quarry, that George pushed the unsuspecting professor off the edge. Ronald fell 90 feet to the rocky bottom below. In an act of supreme cowardice, George looked down, assumed the professor was deceased, and returned to the vehicle where Danelle was waiting. The two then drove back to Ronald S.'s residence, leaving him alone in the dark. In a horrifying twist of fate, the subsequent autopsy would reveal that Ronald did not die instantly. His feet and legs were severely fractured from hitting the ground feet first, but his vital organs remained undamaged, and he had sustained no head injuries. The pathologist concluded that the gentle professor survived at the bottom of the quarry for approximately 2 days, unable to move or call for help, before finally succumbing to the effects of his injuries and dehydration. The cover-up began immediately. To make the disappearance look like a voluntary departure or an accidental mishap, George and Danelle staged the scene. They returned to the quarry to park Ronald S.'s vehicle in a nearby turnout, hoping it would appear as though he had driven there alone. George coerced Danelle into helping him plant a hand rake, a water bottle, a flashlight, and a bag of water softener at the top of the cliff, suggesting that Ronald had fallen while tending to his plants in the dark. For several days, they went about their lives, waiting for the inevitable discovery. It was only on Monday, the 15th of August, when Ronald's close friends grew deeply concerned, after not hearing from him over the weekend, that the police were notified. When the State College Police Department initiated a missing persons investigation, patrol officers visited Ronald S. home and found Danelle and George present. They spun a tale of a depressed professor who had struggled with the loss of his wife and had simply wandered off, perhaps to hike in the woods. Because Ronald did not use a cellular phone, tracking his physical location through modern digital means was impossible. However, investigators immediately noticed a red flag when they checked his financial records and discovered that all credit card activity had abruptly ceased over the weekend. Realizing that the professor was not the type of person to drive away without his cards, detectives escalated the search, placing his vehicle's description in a national database and issuing a media release. The breakthrough in the case occurred on Wednesday, the 17th of August, when a local resident spotted Ronald S.'s unoccupied vehicle parked off a remote country road near the abandoned quarry. When state and local police officers arrived to search the dense wooded area, their attention was drawn to a natural phenomenon that frequently assists search and rescue operations in rural areas. A flock of vultures was circling directly above the limestone quarry. Following this grim sign, investigators entered the quarry from the bottom and discovered Ronald S. body still wearing the distinctive Hawaiian shirt that matched his driver S license photo. The transition from a missing persons case to a homicide investigation was swift. While the physical evidence at the top of the quarry suggested an accident, detectives remained highly skeptical. Their suspicions were confirmed when they canvassed the area and located a neighbor who had been mowing his lawn during the time frame of the disappearance. The witness reported seeing a blonde female, a young child, and a male driving Ronald S. vehicle near the quarry, completely contradicting Danelle and George S. timeline of when they had last seen the professor. Sensing that the authorities were closing in, George tried to deflect suspicion by calling detectives and pointing the finger at Danelle, claiming he was concerned about her behavior and suggesting she was responsible. When detectives conducted an unannounced interview with Danelle the following morning, she became emotional, fearing for her safety. Upon learning that George was accusing her, she blurted out that George had murdered Ronald by pushing him off the quarry and had forced her to help stage the scene. This initial confession allowed police to bring both suspects in for questioning. The interrogation of George Ishler proved to be a masterclass in investigative technique. When confronted with the inconsistencies in his story and the statements made by his niece, George's defensive posture crumbled. He confessed to the crime, but claimed that Danelle was the mastermind who had manipulated him into committing the murder to secure the Professor S. estate. Armed with this confession, detectives obtained a search warrant for George S. mobile phone, uncovering the incriminating text messages from the Delaware trip that proved Danelle's active participation in the conspiracy. Faced with this overwhelming evidence, Danelle eventually confessed to her involvement as well. In April of the year 2018, the case went to trial. Despite attempting to suppress their confessions and presenting highly improbable defenses, including a claim by George that the professor had deliriously jumped off the cliff of his own accord, both defendants were convicted of first-degree murder. Under Pennsylvania law, this conviction carried a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought a sense of relief to Ronald S. family and colleagues, though it could never restore the life of the brilliant and kind-hearted scholar. This tragic case offers profound insights into the psychology of modern criminal activity and the vulnerabilities of isolated individuals. It highlights the absolute necessity of community vigilance, particularly when caring for the elderly or those suffering from cognitive decline. When an individual experiences a major life trauma, such as the loss of a spouse, their support systems must remain active to prevent predatory characters from entering their lives under the guise of friendship. From an investigative standpoint, the case demonstrates the critical role of traditional police work combined with modern forensic science. The observation of natural indicators, such as the circling vultures, the precise estimation of the time of death using forensic entomology, and the strategic use of separate interrogations to break down a conspiracy all serve as valuable lessons for law enforcement agencies worldwide. Ultimately, the story of Dr. Ronald Bettig is a solemn reminder of the dangers of unchecked greed, but it is also a testament to the dedication of the justice system, which worked tirelessly to ensure that those who exploit the vulnerable are held fully accountable for their actions, allowing the memory of a gentle professor's goodness to endure. Nestled in the lush Nittany Valley of central Pennsylvania is the bustling town of State College, a community that perfectly exemplifies the fascinating duality of a classic American university town. On one hand, it is a vibrant center of higher learning, home to the massive campus of Pennsylvania State University and thousands of academic staff members who live and work in the area, driving intellectual progress and cultural development. On the other hand, the moment one steps beyond the town borders, one is surrounded by a deeply traditional rural county where families have lived for generations, maintaining a quiet, natural lifestyle. It was within this peaceful setting that a shocking mystery unfolded in the late summer of the year 2016. A mystery that would ultimately expose a deeply disturbing web of manipulation, betrayal, and tragic greed. Dr. Ronald Bettig was a 55-year-old professor who taught in the Media Studies department at Pennsylvania State University. To those who knew him, he was far more than just an academic. He was an eccentric, warm, and highly visible figure whom anyone could have spotted from a mile away. In a world increasingly dominated by cold technology and formal dress codes, Dr. Bettig was a delightful throwback to a simpler era. He was known for his longish hair, which made him look like someone who had happily grown up in the 60s, and his daily uniform almost always consisted of a vibrant Hawaiian shirt, comfortable shorts, and flip-flops. He disdained modern technology, preferring genuine face-to-face interactions with his students, and he was always eager to engage in deep, intellectual conversations about the political economy of communication, a subject on which he had authored 2 highly regarded books. He was the kind of gentle soul who would literally give you the shirt off his back if you were in need, a trait that unfortunately made him highly vulnerable to those with malicious intentions. Despite his 30 years of successful teaching and academic prestige, Dr. Bettig had experienced significant personal struggles. He had been married twice, and though his second marriage to a beloved colleague named Jhene ended in an amicable divorce in the late 90s, the two remained incredibly close. In the year 2011, tragedy struck when Jhene fell suddenly and severely ill, passing away shortly after being admitted to the hospital. This loss devastated the professor, who deeply missed her and began a slow, painful emotional decline. By the years 2014 and 2015, his grief had manifested as physical weight loss, withdrawal from social life, and the onset of memory issues, leading him to take a sabbatical from his university duties. It was during this vulnerable period of isolation that Dr. Bettig crossed paths with a man named George Ishler, who was working at a local tobacco shop in State College. The two men struck up a friendship based on shared interests, and as their bond grew, George began sharing stories about the difficult circumstances of his niece, Danelle Geier. According to George, Danelle was a young mother with a toddler who was facing near homelessness and lacked the financial means to support herself. Moved by his characteristic empathy, Dr. Bettig could not bear the thought of a young child and a mother struggling to find shelter, and in February of the year 2016, he welcomed Danelle and her child into his home. For a time, this arrangement seemed to bring a sense of purpose and vitality back into the professor's life. Having people to care for energized him, And over the course of several months, his relationship with Danelle evolved from a charitable arrangement into a romantic partnership. Despite a 23-year age difference, Danelle's family members initially observed that the professor was incredibly attentive, helping Danelle obtain everything she and her baby needed, acting as a bright light in what had been a long period of darkness for the grieving academic. However, this light was abruptly extinguished when Dr. Bettig suddenly vanished. On Monday, August 15th, the year 2016, the State College Police Department received a missing persons call from concerned friends of the professor. These friends reported that they had not heard from Dr. Bettig over the entire weekend, which was highly unusual because they normally communicated with him on a regular basis. They explained to the patrol officers that the professor had gone to Rehoboth Beach in Delaware the previous week with Danelle and her Uncle George, and was supposed to have returned on Friday, August 12th. When police officers arrived at the Bettig residence to investigate, they found Danelle Geier and George Ishler at the home. Danelle confirmed that she was the professor's live-in girlfriend, while George described himself as her uncle and a close friend of the professor. They verified the timeline of the beach trip, stating that they had returned late Friday night, after which the professor had supposedly vanished. They painted a picture of a deeply depressed man who was struggling with severe mental health issues and memory loss, suggesting that he had likely wandered off on his own in his vehicle. As the detective assigned to the case began investigating, several red flags immediately arose. Crucially, Dr. Bettig did not own or use a cellular phone, which eliminated a standard tracking tool used by modern law enforcement. Furthermore, an analysis of his financial records showed that his credit card activity, which had been consistent and regular, completely ceased after that weekend. Those close to him knew he was not the type of person to simply drive away without a plan, raising the level of panic among his loved ones and prompting the police to launch a full-scale missing persons investigation, listing his vehicle in national databases and issuing media releases. On Wednesday, August 17th, the year 2016, a major breakthrough occurred when the professor's unoccupied vehicle was discovered, parked on a remote country road about 10 miles outside of State College, adjacent to a local farm and an abandoned limestone quarry. State College detectives and Pennsylvania State Police troopers quickly arrived at the scene. The vehicle was in good condition, with no signs of a break-in, prompting a physical search of the surrounding wooded area, which led directly to the edge of an 80-foot cliff overlooking the quarry. At the top of this cliff, investigators discovered several peculiar items, including a hand rake, a water bottle, a bag of water softener, and a flashlight. While it was initially unclear who these items belonged to, the focus of the search shifted dramatically when officers noticed a flock of vultures circling in the sky directly above the quarry. Recognizing the grim significance of this biological indicator, the search team descended to the bottom of the quarry, where they discovered the clothed body of Dr. Bettig. He was wearing the exact same Hawaiian shirt featured in his driver's license photo, and it was immediately clear that he had suffered severe physical trauma, consistent with a massive fall. An autopsy conducted by the medical examiner revealed a truly heart-wrenching detail. While both of the professor's feet and femurs were severely fractured, showing that he had landed feet first after falling approximately 90 feet, he had suffered no head injuries, and his internal vital organs remained undamaged. The pathologist concluded that Dr. Bettig had actually survived the initial impact of the fall and had remained stranded at the bottom of the quarry without medical assistance for approximately 2 days before succumbing to the physical toll of his injuries. To determine the timeline more precisely, a forensic entomologist analyzed the development of insect larvae found on the body, estimating that the professor had been at the bottom of the quarry for 3 to 5 days, which aligned with the date of his disappearance. Armed with this tragic revelation, investigators were faced with the difficult task of determining whether the fall was an accident, a suicide, or a homicide. They began interviewing everyone connected to the case, and their efforts quickly yielded a vital clue. A local resident who had been mowing grass near the quarry, around the time the professor's vehicle arrived, reported seeing a light-colored vehicle containing a blonde female, a young child, and a male near the scene. This description perfectly matched Danelle, her young son, and George, casting immediate doubt on their story that the professor had gone missing after they returned home. The pressure on the suspects began to mount. Sensing that the police were closing in, George Ishler contacted detectives, claiming he had learned of the discovery through the media and expressing sudden suspicion toward his niece. He suggested that Danelle had not reported the professor missing quickly enough and alleged that she had been spending time with another man while the professor was gone, effectively attempting to shift all blame onto her. When detectives conducted an unannounced interview with Danelle at the residence, she appeared nervous but coherent. As the investigators revealed that the professor's body had been found and hinted that George was pointing the finger at her, Danelle became highly emotional. Fearing for her own safety and that of her child, she suddenly made a dramatic declaration, claiming that George had murdered Dr. Bettig by pushing him off the quarry cliff. Danelle proceeded to share a highly detailed narrative, claiming that George owed the professor money after unlawfully using his credit card for unauthorized purchases. She asserted that George had convinced the professor to travel to Delaware under the pretense of retrieving money to repay the debt, but the trip was unsuccessful. On the drive back, George allegedly suggested they visit a remote quarry where he claimed to have wild marijuana plants growing, prompting the professor to accompany him into the woods while Danelle and her child waited in the car. According to Danelle, George returned alone and later confessed to the crime, threatening to end her life and the life of her son if she ever spoke to anyone. She claimed she was subsequently coerced into helping George drive the professor's car to the scene and planting the handrake, flashlight, and water bottle to stage the area as an accidental fall. While Danelle's story was compelling, investigators remained skeptical and brought George in for questioning late that evening. When confronted with the evidence and the fact that his initial statements did not align with physical realities, George's defensive posture began to crumble. Realizing that his niece had already spoken to the police, George changed his story, first claiming that the professor had accidentally fallen during a playful wrestling match at the cliff's edge. When detectives pushed further, George finally confessed to a much darker reality, asserting that Danelle was actually the mastermind behind the entire plot. According to George, Danelle had manipulated him into committing the crime because she wanted to secure the professor's financial estate. Recognizing the professor's declining mental state, they had successfully convinced him to sign a will that designated Danelle as the primary beneficiary of his home and George as the executor of the estate. Crucially, they believed the professor possessed a massive fortune in corporate stock worth approximately $1 million, which they hoped to inherit, unaware that the actual value of the stock was only about $50,000. George revealed that their plan to eliminate the professor had been accelerated when Dr. Bettig discovered their extensive unauthorized credit card expenditures. Realizing that their financially parasitic relationship was coming to an end, he admitted that they had originally planned to drown the professor during their trip to Rehoboth Beach. But George had been unable to carry out the act. Upon returning to Pennsylvania, they resorted to the quarry plan, luring the trusting academic to the cliff's edge under the guise of harvesting plants, where George ultimately pushed him to his death. Following this shocking confession, George was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including first-degree murder. To confirm his claims regarding Danelle's active involvement, investigators obtained a search warrant for his cellular phone and discovered a highly incriminating text message sent by Danelle during their trip to Delaware, which read that she was deeply upset and absolutely ready to proceed. Confronted with this concrete digital evidence, Danelle eventually broke down during a subsequent interrogation and confessed to her active role in the conspiracy, leading to her arrest on similar charges. In April of the year 2018, both defendants stood trial for the murder of Dr. Ronald Bettig. Despite their attempts to suppress their confessions and claim they were coerced, the court ruled the statements admissible. During the trial, George took the stand and presented a highly improbable defense, claiming that the professor had suddenly acted delirious and voluntarily jumped off the cliff like a cartoon character. Danelle's defense focused on portraying her uncle as a dangerous and coercive figure, arguing that her text message had been misinterpreted and merely reflected her frustration with the long road trip. However, during a powerful cross-examination, Danelle was forced to admit that the professor would never have traveled to the quarry if she had not been there to facilitate the trip. After a 6-day trial, the jury rejected their fabrications and found both George Ishler and Danelle Geier guilty of first-degree murder. Under Pennsylvania law, this conviction carried a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring that justice was served for the senseless and cruel betrayal of a beloved educator. Analyzing this tragic case reveals profound insights into the psychological and sociological dynamics of trust-based crimes, which unfortunately occur with alarming frequency in modern society. At the heart of these offenses is a predatory exploitation of vulnerability. Individuals who are experiencing profound grief, cognitive decline, or social isolation are often targeted by opportunistic manipulators who slowly integrate themselves into the victim's life under the guise of friendship or romance. The perpetrators often employ sophisticated grooming techniques, gradually increasing their financial demands while simultaneously isolating the victim from their existing support networks, making it exceedingly difficult for the victim to recognize the danger until it is too late. The resolution of this case highlights the critical importance of meticulous police work and the utilization of diverse investigative avenues. While the criminals attempted to construct a highly coordinated cover-up, their scheme ultimately collapsed due to several critical flaws and the swift, logical deductions of law enforcement. The police did not simply accept the initial narrative of a depressed man wandering off. Instead, they analyzed financial records to identify the sudden cessation of credit card use which immediately signaled a high probability of foul play. By conducting a thorough physical canvass of the area surrounding the abandoned vehicle, they secured the vital eyewitness testimony of the local resident mowing grass, which completely shattered the suspect's alibi. Furthermore, the integration of scientific disciplines played a monumental role in securing justice. The meticulous autopsy refuted any possibility of a quick or painless accidental fall, proving that the victim had survived for days, while the expertise of the forensic entomologist provided an undeniable timeline of events. When combined with the recovery of deleted digital forensic evidence from the suspect's cellular devices, the prosecution was able to present an airtight case that exposed the deep-seated conspiracy. To prevent such heartrending tragedies in the future, communities must draw vital life lessons regarding the protection of vulnerable individuals. Family members, neighbors, and colleagues must remain actively engaged in the lives of those who have experienced severe loss or are dealing with cognitive difficulties. Recognizing the early warning signs of financial exploitation, such as sudden changes in estate planning, unauthorized credit card charges, or the sudden appearance of highly controlling friends, is paramount. Establishing legal safeguards, such as joint financial monitoring or professional estate management, can prevent predatory individuals from exploiting a loved one's goodwill. For law enforcement agencies, this case serves as an invaluable blueprint for accelerating the resolution of complex missing persons and homicide investigations. The rapid deployment of localized search efforts, the immediate preservation of digital and financial records, and the strategic use of separate suspect interrogations to exploit natural distrust among co-conspirators are highly effective strategies. By honoring the tireless efforts of the investigating forces and the triumph of logical analysis over calculated deception, society can continue to uphold justice, protect the innocent, and ensure that the memory of gentle, brilliant individuals like Dr. Ronald Bettig is preserved with the absolute respect they deserve.